Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Influential Motherhood Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Duncan, and as a mom and lawyer, I want to be a cheerleader for moms who don't want to give up their own goals and dreams. Around here, we celebrate moms who are making a difference and talk about ways to juggle work, motherhood, goals, faith, self-care, and more. I'm so glad you're here. The only filters we use around here are coffee filters, so pour yourself a cup and enjoy the show. On today's episode of Influential Motherhood, I am chatting with Katelyn Denning, and Katelyn is a mom of three. She works full-time, and she is coaching moms who are going back to work based on the experiences that she had returning back to full-time work after her first child. So, Katelyn, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you.
I'm thankful that you're here and that you are going to share really important, helpful, practical information with us today. So what Katelyn and I are going to talk about is how to kind of prioritize all the things that are coming at moms and help try to simplify, because what I hear from moms so often is I'm having a really hard time just finding balance and prioritizing and sorting through all the needs that people have. So that's what we're going to talk about. But before we get to that, Katelyn, tell us a little bit more about you and your family and kind of how you got to this place of expertise that you are that you're kind of sitting in now as a mom.
Yeah, happy to. Well, like you already mentioned, I have three small children. I have, at the time of this recording, a 5-year-old, a 2.5-year-old, and an 8-month-old. I do work full time. I'm in sort of a sales role in the software industry and have done that for a number of years. And in addition to that, I coach busy, overwhelmed working moms on both the transition.
I'm raising my hand.
I know,
I am all of those things.
Yes, I know. So, on a number of things, certainly the transition back to work, like you mentioned, is a big one. But I think regardless of where women are in that journey, it ultimately comes down to priorities, to managing time, to setting expectations. All of those things are really what I work with moms on. And, I started doing this work after my oldest, my son, was born. And I know I've heard you talk about this and so many of your guests as well, just a tough transition, especially back to work and trying to figure out who I was and juggling all of those things. I had, the unrealistic expectation that I was going to do everything that I did before and motherhood.
Yeah.
And right. And it took me some time and some work with coaches and counselors of my own and just a lot of trial and error to really get to a place of understanding that my life was going to continue to shift and change, and that with each of those changes, there were things that had to go, and that was okay. And, it's kind of a constant process of reevaluating what's most important at that particular stage and letting go of things so you have more time for your family or for yourself or for your career or the other things that are really important at that point.
That's great. So I think what's so interesting about your story is you learned about letting things go, but then you really kind of added on the coaching piece. So tell us kind of how you circled around to adding that piece on and why that was actually a good thing for you to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Certainly from the outside doesn't look like I let go of much. And I'll be completely transparent. I think there was a stage, even leading into after I had my second child, my daughter, where I kind of got back into old habits. Those are hard to break, of like being focused on productivity and just do. And yes, I had added not only motherhood to my plate, but also the coaching work. And it's been more so this year with the birth of my third child, where I've really gotten to a great place of only focusing on the things that are really important, and I have let so much more go. I thought I let go of things before, but I've done an even better job now. And so
That's
it doesn't
great.
feel like more, but it certainly, I'm sure, could look like that.
Yeah, that's great. So before we start kind of going into the practical tips that you have for us,
Yes.
give us a little preview so we kind of know how this is going to work. What are some of examples of some things that you let go of in the course of, having from your first child to your third child, a couple of things you let go of?
Yeah. Great question. And I think these, look different for everybody. But for
Mm-hmm.
me, I would say, and this is going to sound fluffy and not tactical, but the biggest thing for me has been letting go of expectations.
Okay.
Um,
Yep. Your
I was,
expectations?
yes, I
Yeah.
was always so guilty of, thinking that things were going to go a certain way or that I was going to get this whole list of things done in a day. I think that's been a huge one for me. I was
Yeah.
always a slave to my to-do list and had sort of overestimated my abilities and the number of hours and the energy that I had each day. And so I've really done a lot to make better decisions about what actually has to get done. But other things, more practical things, I let go of cleaning my house and I'm able to swing that, and I know not everyone can, but I have
Mm-hmm.
someone that helps clean my house every other week. I also have let go of having great meals on the table. I used to hold myself to this crazy standard of, you know, prepping and cooking all of these amazing meals. And I've come to
Yeah.
realize that being fed, like fed is best. That's
Yep.
the same for my family.
Yes. I love
Yeah. So,
that.
I mean, those are a couple of examples. I've certainly done other things with, the stuff in my life and starting to pare down and focus more on time and less on the things. But, yeah, I mean, I could go on and on.
Oh, I love that. Well, it sounds like all of these things have made a difference. And I love that you've kind of come full circle with it. And, just in your own experience, are able to now help other women.
Hmm.
We'll talk more about, that work after we talk about the tips. So,
Yeah.
like I said, I actually have an opportunity when folks join my Facebook group, the Influential Motherhood community. One of the questions that I ask when they request to join is what's one of your biggest struggles as a mom? And there's this huge trend that I get around finding balance,
Hmm.
figuring out how to prioritize, figuring out how to simplify things. And when you told me that you were willing to talk about simplifying and prioritizing, that's why I was like, yes, this is it.
Yeah.
So walk us through some ways that, if it's kind of what I would think of as if a camera were following around just your standard working mom, what or just a busy mom, because there are lots of
Hmm.
stay-at-home moms who are
Yes.
equally as busy as those of us who work. And I want to validate that and say this is not just for working moms, but if there's a mom who is just like, her hair is always on fire because everything seems to be on fire. How can she start in terms of prioritizing and simplifying?
Yeah, that's a great place to begin. I think same kind of experience that you have, I think so many of us are struggling with time. I think it, comes down to time and balance, like you said. And I do think for what I've seen with the women I work with, the ones who can really make change are the women who really have gotten to some point in their life where they know something has to change. Like simplifying life, cutting back, slowing down is necessary.
Yeah.
So, I've seen women that, myself included, a health scare, right? You've been dealing with things like that recently as well. Anxiety, maybe you have an anxiety attack or just kind of overall low level anxiety. I think I've heard stories from women I've talked to where it's something that your kid says or models back to you that is like a red flag of, wow, I'm not showing a kind of life that I want my children to see.
Yeah.
And so I think that being kind of the first step of, okay, now you're really ready to take stock of what you do and how you spend your time and start to make some of those changes.
Yeah.
I think, one of the best things that I did is a number of, and again, you're going to have to carve out some time or some mental space to think about some of these, but I think doing a time audit, as tedious as that sounds, I think of Laura Vanderkam, right, who talks about time management especially for working moms. Download the Toggle app, do something like that where you are taking stock of everything you do. One, you should feel like, wow, that's crazy and proud and look at all of that. But on the other hand, it starts to really give you some insight into all that you're doing and maybe some areas that are particularly challenging that you can then focus or zero in on to think about, okay, how am I going to simplify those particular areas? And is that going to be by letting it go completely, by, purging that item or that schedule thing on your calendar? Or is it going to be, I need some help or I need a routine around this? Do I need to reset my expectations when it comes to this and start, set the bar a little bit lower? But I love starting with the time audit.
Okay, that's great. So after the time audit, if a mom is able to assess her time on kind of over the course of a typical day or week and say, okay, I see what I'm doing and I feel no less, overwhelmed than I did before I did this time audit, what's the starting point in even figuring out what can be outsourced or what needs to go? Because I feel like if I did this time audit, I would probably just look at it and think, well, yeah, I see the problem, but where do I even begin? And I think it would feel overwhelming to me in terms of like, how do I even begin to simplify this? Yeah. So how do you even take the time audit to that next level?
Yeah, that's I think a very typical reaction. I know I've done that as well or I've talked with moms who say, well, there's nothing here that I can let go of.
Yes.
So I think another exercise that I always challenge women to go through is, and you mentioned this earlier, thinking about what is really important to you, what kind of, take a moment and think of the big picture, write your eulogy if you need to do that, think about what kind of life, when my kids are going to leave my house at, say, let's assume age 18 for ease. What do I want them to look back on and remember in terms of the kind of life we led and the kind of home and family and activities that we took part in? What are they going to walk away from this experience of being under my care for these years, thinking about life or knowing in terms of what they can create? And I think those types of questions, especially when you think about your kids as adults, right?
Yeah.
It's feels like forever from now, especially if you have young children. But I think that can really be a wake-up call for, again, like what are you really spending your time on? And let that kind of sink in. And some of this is just becoming aware of the mismatch between what you see your everyday looks like and what you really want to create in terms of your legacy, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, that is, I think, a beautiful way of thinking about it in terms of kind of stepping back and widening the lens a little bit to think
Hmm.
about, 18 years from now, what's the story that you as a family want to tell?
Yeah.
I love that. I
Yeah,
love
I mean,
that.
I don't think anyone wants to, have their kid go off and remember their mom is just constantly cleaning, right?
Right.
Or constantly, whatever it is that you do, staring at your phone, right? I know for me, when I did a time audit not too long ago, and I feel like, a hot topic right now,
Hmm.
but there was a lot of time that I wasn't being honest with myself about that I was wasting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure, I need some mental white space to veg out in front of the TV some evenings or scroll on my phone. I'm on social media for my business as well, but there was also a lot of other just like putzing around the house. So what was I really doing? And is
Yeah.
that really how I wanted to spend that time? Or could I have been reading a book or playing a game with my kids if they were, if it was during their wake hours? So,
Yeah.
there's a lot of real honesty too that you have to have with yourself when you're looking at both the time audit and what you really want to create.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, and before we started recording, I don't think we were recording when we were talking about this, but we were talking about how, you find time for your coaching in full-time, like as a full-time working mom, and I find time
Hmm.
for the podcast as a full-time working mom. And as you're talking through this time audit concept, I'm realizing that I kind of did that without realizing it when I was thinking about starting the podcast, because I thought, well, when could I do this? And I thought, well, okay, the options are either, 5 a.m., which is not especially practical for my typical guest,
Right, right.
or after the kids go to bed, or on the weekends. And weekends are definitely family time. And every now and then I'll record an episode on a weekend. But I thought, well, what do I do at night? And I mean, the reality is I would surf the internet or, like kind of putz around on the internet, not doing a lot of really productive things, um, or watch TV. And I
Mhm.
thought, like, there's probably at least 3 hours a night because I'm a night owl. And so I was like, there's at least 3 hours a night where I'm not actually doing anything super productive, in terms of, I mean, it's nice to veg out, but
Yeah.
that's time that I could use. And so when people say to me, how do you find time to do this? I say, well, I do it at night when you're probably doing something that you like to do, like read or watch TV or sleep. And I choose, that's a choice, and I choose to do the podcast. Like,
Mhm.
there's no
Mhm.
right or wrong, but for me, it's not like I have more hours in the day than anybody else does. This is just how I choose to, use that time. And it
Exactly.
took me kind of auditing my extra time to figure out that I actually did have time to do it. So,
Yeah. And that's a great example of it. And another thing for everyone to think about is along those same lines, we will often stretch tasks to fill time, even if they don't
mm-hmm.
really take that long. So,
Yes.
again, when you're thinking and looking at your day, were you, kind of slowly washing the dishes, and if you were enjoying that and being very mindful about it, great, or were you just kind of stretching to fill it because you didn't have a plan for what was next? I mean, I know before we started recording, I cleaned up the kitchen in record time because I
Yeah.
knew I had to be done with it to get up here and log on to record this with
Yep.
you. So again, like normally I probably would have stretched that to like 30 minutes, even though it doesn't really take that long.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. And I love that what your overall point is not, you know, um, prioritize your time so that you can accomplish more in terms of like go hustle and,
No,
like
yeah,
this isn't a now you can hustle harder. It's a now you can be in the places that you want to be with the people that you want to be, right? I mean, this is like
absolutely. I
a
couldn't have said it better.
priority. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. Hey friends, popping into this episode to remind you to subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. You can also sign up for my monthly newsletter for secret posts and bonus content at www.melissaduncan.com/join. Now let's get back to the show. So I'm curious, going back to you saying, letting go of expectations and why that was. It's interesting to me that that's the first thing that came to your mind, because it's not tangible. It's not like, well, I got rid of, the TV in our bedroom kind of thing.
Right.
It's more of like an overall kind of mental and emotional approach to life. And so did you have to do any outward explanation with the people in your life as you were letting go of those expectations?
Oh, that's a good question. I've never thought about that. I don't think that I did. I don't think I ever stated to anyone, but now that you bring it up, I feel like, and I'm curious if you or, others would relate to this. I feel like when I started to relax, when I decided I was going to be less driven by my to-do list and more driven by how I wanted to spend my time, what I wanted to invest, in my time, that I think everyone around me, like I'm picturing my husband or like my oldest son, they just sort of relaxed.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy how much like of an impact we have on our immediate family? Yeah, the vibe in our house. And I think, I think honestly, everyone just relaxed a little bit and we all just, I don't know if they followed my lead or what, but we definitely have a slower, just more comfortable pace of life. And yeah, I mean, it's been game changing, especially this year.
That's great. That's wonderful. Yeah, I think that the older we get and the more kids we have, the more we kind of let go of expectations.
So true.
Yeah. And I think it's funny that I think a lot of the expectations that we as moms really need to let go of, like nobody's putting those on us except ourselves.
Yes.
And that's why I was asking, did you feel like you had to kind of explain or defend yourself to anybody? Like, okay, now we're not going to do this big thing anymore. And for me, I feel like that has been birthday parties. So
yes.
I for my oldest son's first birthday, I handmade every invitation, like, printed them on the printer at home, like glued them together, cut out the circles and the dots, like the polka dots with a like a cutter thing and glued them on with glue dots. I mean, it was like this whole ordeal.
Oh my gosh.
And now
I
text our family. I'm like, can y'all come on the on the 18th for Hayes' birthday party?
Pizza.
And like we had his Brooks's birthday party a few weeks ago. I ordered Chick-fil-A online the day before.
Yes.
And just like I probably paid more than I would have, if I had like done the whole thing myself, but I was like, who cares? Like I'm feeding the people what they need to be fed. And all I had to do was log online and order it. And, they were like, oh, we're having Chick-fil-A. And I kind of felt like I needed to explain myself, it's just been really busy. I haven't had a chance and to do anything else. And they were like, no, this is great. And so I was like, okay, good, we're in. But my husband was at the store the morning of, and he was like, I'm going to pick out the cake. And do we need balloons? And I was like, nah, we don't need balloons. So it's been this gradual, this was his 6th birthday. So we've come a long way. But I'm like, the things we're going to remember are not like what we ate and whether we had balloons. We're going to remember laughing and playing together and, just being together as a family. So I think it's hard when you feel like you have to kind of live up to these like mom standards in the beginning, but I do feel like it gets easier as you have more kids and get a little bit older and you're just kind of like, whatever. I don't care.
I agree.
I don't care.
And I think too, talking about it. So I don't know if you have friends that, do something similar to what you just described. I love that example. I think birthday parties are a great example of letting go, but I know I have several close girlfriends, and we almost like wear it like a badge of honor that I ordered my Thanksgiving dinner from Whole Foods last
Yes.
Thanksgiving,
Yes.
or I didn't do this, I ordered that, or I did that, and some of that certainly is not for everybody to be able to, but yeah, I think the more that we share and say with pride, or say what you just did about no one really cared, no one noticed, no one's going to
Right.
remember, that we all start to normalize doing less or phoning it
Yeah.
in. There's nothing wrong
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah, exactly. I did on Instagram, I one day had a prompt for, kind of just what people were, the kind of the prompt of the week. And it
Hmm.
was, what are you not doing this week? And
Yes, I
so,
remember that.
yeah, so it was like, just like, let's let go of something this week. What are you not going to do? And it was kind of fun just to hear what people were saying they weren't going to do and able to
Yeah.
let go of. So that's great. So, as you have coached moms through the transition back to work, or in kind of simplifying and getting organized in their own
Hmm.
lives, is there just kind of this common, I guess, kind of number one thing that everybody needs to let go of, or I know it's not an across the board thing, but what's the biggest challenge that you're seeing that moms are facing or can kind of let go of?
Oh, that is a tough one, because I feel like in terms of, everyone in terms of their, I'll call it home management, or
Hmm.
family, it's so different.
Yeah.
But I tend to attract and work with women who are high achievers, personally,
Right.
professionally. And so I think if I had to summarize one, I'd say a big area that we work on is letting go of just what we've been talking about, the to-do list,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
thinking that we are superwoman, and that list of 100 things that, we brain dump down onto paper, which I do and I'm a big fan of, but thinking that I'm going to get all this done today, and
Hmm.
then beating ourselves up at the end of the workday when that clock ticks 5 or whatever and we have to go get the kids. And I think that, again, it ties into expectations as well, but it's like this overestimating how productive we're going to be. I feel like that's one of the biggest things that I work on with women, and just kind of, let's reset expectations. Let's cross 2/3 of that list off and table it for later. And then let's revisit and see if it's really even necessary.
Yeah.
And just do a little bit less today and see how you feel.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Do you have a favorite productivity tool to kind of help, I guess, organize the
Like a
things that you do need
planner
to
or
do? Or
an
yeah, or an
app, or
app,
is that?
or yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I could talk forever. I'm always experimenting with things. Um, I I use a combination of things. I do love Trello if I
Hmm.
need something app generated for keeping track of projects and lists. But um, I'm a big fan lately of a paper planner called the Panda Planner that I
Oh.
love, because it's kind of a combination of, it reminds me in the morning to be grateful for something. So I
Hmm.
love starting that, and I found it hard to keep those lists separate. Like, I was carrying around 10 notebooks with me,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then it does have a spot for priorities, which has been great for me this year in particular, because, I know that these X things are really the what I want to create in terms of my life. And so, do I have something each week dedicated to those areas? And then I also am big on scheduling, like putting my actual task items onto a slot in my calendar, because it makes me be really honest about how much time I have
Yeah,
and
that's
how
great.
many of those tasks I'm going to get done. So that's my current one that I'm on, but I'm always playing around with that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I'm an experimenter also, and I currently use a plum paper. planner.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Which I love. But I've tried a bunch of other ones, and my problem is I like to be able to have something to take notes in, and I don't really. It's more of I like it as a to-do list, really more. Which I know we're trying to get away from to-do lists, but I will tell you one trick that I've found. So here's my little to-do list trick. So somebody says to me, you need to do this, but I think in my head, but like that doesn't actually have to be done this week. We might like for it to be done this week, but it doesn't have to be done this week. And so I'll just flip, a week or two ahead and then go ahead and write it in the to-do list for that week.
Yeah.
And so it's like I don't have to hold it in my head anymore. It frees up that mental space of trying to remember it. And it's not stressing me out because it's like, well, there's one more thing that I have to get done right now. And I can kind of forget about it. And then I flip, when I finally get to that week, I look at it and I think, oh yeah, I need to do that this week. But it's nice because otherwise my to-do list every single week would just be out of control. And so it's a nice way for me to kind of set some boundaries around, okay, this week is already full. I will not do that this week. I will do that next week.
I think
nice.
That's great. And I'm all for getting it out of your head and onto paper or, whatever kind of list that you use. But I think what you just said is key, that having it in front of you every day is what creates the stress.
Yeah.
Because you're seeing it and you're thinking, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing enough. So put it on a list or put it in a future week like you do, and then put it in the back of your planner and only pull it out when you're making your list for that day or that week. And that's when the decision-making ability of deciding, like you said, what actually has to get done and what maybe never has to get done.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's really good. What's your own criteria for kind of, what can just kind of completely go?
Honestly, it's kind of taken me some trial and error, and I've just learned over, months of doing this that the things that sit on there and never get done probably never need to get done. Like if they didn't have a deadline or someone's not following up with me about it, it's not that important.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I used to be like a project addict. I always had some house project or organizing thing or whatever. And now it's like, what? If I feel like it, I'll go do that, but I'm not going to put it on a list because it doesn't actually have to get done.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. Yeah. Or if maybe like for me, if putting it on the list, if I could just as quickly just get it done in the, in the amount, like just do it. And then it's not even on a list.
2-minute rule or whatever, David Allen.
That's funny. Do you have any favorite books or resources that moms could turn to in just this topic of like, in addition to you, of course, but any good books that you've read or other resources in terms of simplifying or kind of prioritizing?
Yeah, I have several. One that was kind of an unlikely guide for me in this whole process, but I think could be sort of a dual purpose resource is Simplicity Parenting. Have you ever heard of that book or read it? So it's geared obviously it's like a parenting resource book. And I think some great tips in there on that front. But there's a lot in there that even though he's writing for how you should create structure or an environment or schedules or unplug for your kids, that I think are really relevant for adults too. And we just don't treat ourselves with the same sort of care. So that's kind of an unlikely one, but I just love that book and recommend it.
That's great.
Another one that I have really been loving is the book Do Less by Kate Northrup.
Okay.
It's great, especially for moms and working moms. So that it's a little woo-woo if you're okay with that. But just a lot of great ideas about doing work when your energy is in the right place. So, not trying to push through something if you don't have to, because it's going to take you twice as long than if you just table it for a time when maybe you got a better night's sleep or, things are just a little bit different. So I do love that one as well.
That's great. I love that. Thank you for sharing those.
Yeah.
Because I think that, for a lot of us, it's like, okay, I can, if I can squeeze in 15 minutes a day to read, I want it to be something that's going to be helpful, and is going to kind of send me in a positive, productive direction. So that's great. So tell us a little bit more about your coaching and what that looks like in case anybody's listening and they think, this is something that I could continue the conversation with Katelyn about, and then also where to find you online.
Happy to. Yeah. So I do all of this and more with my one-on-one clients. And so working with me currently looks like a 3-month engagement. I like to really work with women for a chunk of time. I feel like we have so much to cover, and everything we've talked about today, it's not a small task that can be done in a quick conversation. So that's how I work with women these days is just my one-on-one work. And you can find more about that any of my other resources on my website, which is themothernurture.com. And I also love to hang out on Instagram, which is how I found you.
Yeah.
And my handle is Love Mother Nurture.
Love Mother Nurture. Very good.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like I could talk to you for hours about this.
I know
that would, then we would all be so tired tomorrow. So, I think that just the work that you're doing is so helpful and so important. And these have been such great tips. I feel like my next step is to do a time audit, and I'm scared to see what that looks like. But I think it's going to be like a good kind of pain, work through it and get it out so I can then address like, where am I wasting my time, and could be playing or reading or sleeping
and think about your vision too. Like when you do find those pockets of time, what is it that you enjoy? What's going to make you a little bit happier or more present with your kids? What is the kind of legacy that you want to leave for them? And make sure that when you find those time pockets, that's what you're doing.
That's how we fill them. Yeah, that's so great. Well, I just think that what you're doing is wonderful. So thank you, Katelyn, for sharing all of this with the audience that listens to this show, and looking forward to hearing more from you as you continue to dig into your coaching business and share this valuable information online. So thanks so much, Katelyn.
Much. Yeah, this was fun. Thank you.
This was fun. Thanks. I'm so thankful for the moms who share their stories on here on the show and in our fun Instagram community. I'd love for you to connect with me online at Influential Motherhood on Instagram and Facebook to continue the conversation or just say hello. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star rating and a written review in the Apple Podcast app. It's how you can help get the show in front of moms looking for episodes just like this one. I hope you'll find a way to influence your work or community for good this week. Don't forget, you can listen to other episodes or learn more about the show at www.influentialmotherhood.com. See you next week.